I wanted to look at the relationship between palliative care and assisted dying. Let's look at growth in palliative care services. And there was growth in assisted dying countries, but when you look at Western European countries that do not have assisted dying, the growth is much faster. Since 2012, Dutch and Belgian palliative care growth has completely stalled. And that means as the need for palliative care has increased, it has not been matched. If we look at hospices, it's interesting that 15 years after legalization in Oregon, 2/3 of the hospices were refusing to take part. There doesn't seem to be a cozy relationship there. And we have to bear in mind that when people talk about hospice in Oregon, it's very different to the UK. It's mostly home care nursing, rather like UK district nursing. Doctors don't even have to be a palliative care specialist. Many are for-profit services, and that has huge implications. For example, the patient has to agree to be no longer eligible for disease-reversing treatments. And you may say, well, that's obvious, but what it does, it prevents access for symptom control, vital things that we can access in the UK. And in Oregon, there's no information on the percentage who are receiving UK-like specialist multidisciplinary palliative care. So claiming hospice involvement is really meaningless unless you know exactly what that means. What about the wider issue of end-of-life care? How do assisted dying countries do? And what you'll notice, with the exception of Switzerland that's gone up a couple of places, although it's still currently 13th, all of them have actually got worse in the last 6 years. And the issue of suicide. Now, if it is true that legalizing assisted dying reduces non-assisted suicides in people with serious illness, we should be seeing a reduction or at least a leveling out. But the exact opposite is true. And in fact, non-assisted suicide rates in Oregon have increased by 1/3 since legalization. I'm not suggesting that there's a link, but what it does show is that legalizing assisted dying does not reduce non-assisted suicide rates. There's also an impact on staff. Assisted dying has a psychological impact on up to half of healthcare professionals, an impact that persists long-term in up to 1/5. Doctors in Victoria, Australia are struggling to do eligibility assessments, even struggling to get to know the patient, let alone reconcile their own role in assisted deaths. So who's going to provide the additional staff to counsel them and replace them when they need a break? And safeguards. Safeguards in every legislature have been weakened or removed, and that includes Oregon. People say assisted dying already goes on illegally in the UK, and legalizing it would remove that. Well, the evidence doesn't support that. In Belgium, 48% of Belgian assisted deaths are not reported. In 18%, that's because doctors say it's too big an administrative load. And it's quite common in parts of Europe for something called continuous deep sedation to be used, and it's used as a cover for euthanasia. This is quite different to what we call in the UK palliative care sedation, where we titrate the drugs to the symptoms, not more, not less. And a recent study in Japan has shown that that doesn't hasten death. So there's no evidence that illegal activity reduces. In fact, it may actually get worse. Palliative care's foundation is safeguards, whether it's physical, psychological, or social. What we are not seeing is those safeguards in assisted dying. And I want to suggest something about the decision-making process that's going on. The reality is, as doctors, we're not trained to detect coercion and manipulation. We're poor at detecting depression, perhaps a bit better in palliative care, but we still struggle. We still struggle in some situations to assess capacity. As for suffering, we have no method or tool anywhere in the world that estimates suffering. And we're not good at estimating prognosis, especially in non-cancer like motor neuron disease. The reality is that as doctors, we are biased and fallible because of our compassion. And I would suggest that doctors are the weak link in deciding on and practicing assisted dying. Thank you for listening.